time is now 6:04 on Wednesday, October 25th, 2017, and this public hearing regarding the revisions to the state's beachfront jurisdictional lines will now begin. My name is Elizabeth Von Kolnitz. I am the Chief for DHEC's Office of Ocean Coastal Resource Management, and on behalf of DHEC, I would like to welcome you here tonight and thank you all for coming out. The purpose of this hearing tonight is to provide a formal opportunity for you to give us verbal or written comments. This is also an opportunity for OCRM staff to present information about the jurisdictional lines, how they might affect you, and to provide an overview on the process. Additionally, we recognize that many of you will have questions about the lines, and we want to discuss those with you. We have set up stations outside this auditorium in room 601. It's down the hall. At the end of the hall, if you take a right, we will have staff there to provide one-on-one conversations, to address any questions, to review the lines specifically for your area or your property, and we can discuss the data that was used to establish the lines in those areas and address any other questions you may have. If you would prefer to make an appointment to address questions or review this information at a later date, we invite you to please contact our offices and we will follow up with you to set up an appointment. All of the contact information and website information can be found at the bottom of the flyer that you picked up on your way in. As we start this meeting, please know that each person's input is valued and important to us. Therefore, I ask that you be respectful of those presenting views or making comments tonight. So that this hearing moves forward in a timely manner, the following guidelines have been established. There will be no questions and answers while a presentation or comment is being made. A staff member may, however, ask a speaker to clarify a point. All comments will be made from this microphone podium. And so that everyone has an opportunity to speak, your comments should not exceed 5 minutes. We have a large number of people who have signed up to speak tonight, and we ask that you be conscientious of your time. One of us may signal to remind you if your comments are exceeding that time period. For this hearing, we will proceed in the following order. Blair Williams, manager of OCRM's Critical Area Section, and Jessica Boynton, OCRM Shoreline Specialist, will present information on the line process. Second, those who have signed up to provide comment will be called upon. If you decide you no longer wish to make a comment when called, you may decline at that time. And third, if anyone has not had a chance to speak but would like to make a comment, you will be called upon. Following the comment periods, or during the comment period, if you have questions or would like to review your lines, we will have staff available in room 601. Prior to making your comments, I ask that you clearly state your name for the group you are representing, if any, for the court reporter. If you have a written copy of your comments and don't mind leaving that with us tonight, please do so. Should any comment begin to move away from the intent of this hearing, you may be asked to limit your statements. I ask that each speaker that is allowed to be presented his or her views without interruptions. So we will now proceed with the information, and I call on Blair Williams.
Thank you. Good evening. As Elizabeth had mentioned, my name is Blair Williams. I manage the Critical Area Permitting Section for the Department's Office of Ocean Coastal Resource Management. What I'll speak to tonight is our authority within the beachfront and what that means to you all as property owners. I'm going to start off first by saying, what are the beachfront jurisdictional lines? The jurisdictional lines enable the department to implement laws and regulations that protect coastal resources and guide development away from dynamic shorelines. There are two lines that delineate the department's beachfront jurisdiction. The first line is called the baseline, which is the more seaward line. The second line is the setback line, which is the more landward line. These proposed lines can be viewed at sedhec.gov/beachfront lines. This is an aerial describing exactly what I just stated. The blue line is the setback line. This is the line that is more landward. The red line is the baseline, which is the line that is closest towards the ocean. So why are we updating the lines? First of all, it's required by law. South Carolina law requires DHEC to establish and review the positions of the setback lines and baselines every 7 to 10 years. The last review was conducted in between the years 2008 and 2010. This is a routine process that the department implements. The law also requires DHEC to review the average long-term shoreline change rate, also known as the long-term erosion rate, for all oceanfront land that is or potentially could be developed during this time. Why update the lines now? Because there is a legislative deadline. In June 2016, legislation went into effect that prohibits the seaward movement of the jurisdictional baseline from its position on December 31st, 2017. In order to allow any seaward movement of the lines in this revision, DHEC must complete the process prior to this December 31st legislative deadline. DHEC is planning to meet this target deadline. If the revision process were to be delayed, all existing lines would have to stay in place, including those areas where the state's beachfront jurisdiction is proposed to move seaward. What I'd like to do now is talk about what it means to you as property owners in the beachfront. And the area that we're going to focus on right now is the area called the setback area. This is the area between the blue line, which is the setback line, and the red line, which is the baseline. What do the proposed setback lines mean for homes? The setback area is not a no-build zone. Existing homes may remain. Homes which may be damaged beyond repair due to a storm may be reconstructed up to the total square footage of the original structure. New homes may be constructed up to 5,000 square feet of heated space within the setback area. Construction and repair activities require notification to DHEC. What does the proposed setback line mean for pools? Again, which is I think is important to understand, that the setback area is not a no-build zone. Existing pools may remain. Pools damaged or destroyed may be rebuilt to pre-existing dimensions with DHEC authorization. New pools are not permitted unless they are located behind an existing functional erosion control structure, such as a seawall or revetment, and receives prior written approval from DHEC. Now what I'd like to talk about is that area seaward of the baseline, which is the red line moving towards the ocean. What do the proposed baselines mean for homes? Existing homes that are partially or fully seaward of the baseline may remain. Homes may be repaired to pre-existing square and linear footage, and new construction and reconstruction of homes damaged beyond repair, again to a storm event or something of that nature, may be allowed up to 5,000 square feet through a special permit if certain criteria are met. What do the proposed lines mean for pools? What do the proposed baselines mean for pools? Existing pools may remain. Pools damaged or destroyed may be reconstructed upon obtaining a special permit if they are located behind an existing functional erosion control structure. No new pools can be permitted. So we talked a little bit, that area seaward of the baseline, and mentioned the word special permits. I'd like to talk a little bit about what special permits are. And this is for construction activities seaward of that baseline. A special permit is essentially an individual critical area permit, which is given additional consideration because it's seaward of the baseline. And if you have any specific questions on the special permit process, again, we're going to have staff available in room 671 who will be able to answer those questions on that process. What I'd like to point out is that between 1990 and present day, there have been 72 special permit requests. Of those 72 special permit requests for habitable structures, the department has issued 71 special permits. What I'd like to do now is hand it over to our shoreline specialist, Jessica Boynton, to talk about how these lines were established.
Good evening. As Blair said, my name is Jessica Boynton, and I'm the shoreline specialist for OCRM. So I'm going to talk about the process of how the baseline and setback line were established. To begin, the process for setting both the baseline and the setback, including things like minimum distances and multipliers, are established in South Carolina law. So I'm going to start by talking about how the baseline is established, and then I'm going to move into how the setback is established. So in establishing the baseline, the first thing you need to know is that the baseline is established depending on which beach zone you're in. In South Carolina, there are 3 beach zones. We have an unstabilized inlet zone, a stabilized inlet zone, and a standard zone. 2 of these zones, the process for establishing the baseline is the same. For the unstabilized inlet zone, the process is different, and I'm going to talk about both of those processes. First, I want to show you a few examples of what these different zones look like. This is Capers Inlet in the southern portion of our state. This is an example of an unstabilized inlet zone. Those are inlets that have not been stabilized by jetties, terminal groins, or other structures. This is the Charleston Harbor side of Sullivan's Island. This is an example of a stabilized inlet zone. Those are inlets which have been stabilized by jetties, terminal groins, or other structures. And last, this is the standard zone. This is Myrtle Beach State Park. And this is a standard zone is a segment of shoreline which is subject to essentially the same set of coastal processes, have a fairly constant range of beach profiles as well as sediment characteristics, and they're not directly influenced by tidal inlets or inlet shoals. So we're going to start by talking about how the baseline is set if you're in an unstabilized inlet zone. And in this zone, the baseline is set at the most landward point of erosion at any time in the last 40 years. Both modern as well as historic shorelines were used to determine that most landward point of erosion in the last 40 years. Modern lines were collected with a Trimble GOXT GPS unit. Field collection of the shorelines and the data analysis of those shorelines spanned over a year and did include both pre- and post-Matthew shoreline data. The entire coast was reviewed post-Hurricane Matthew. In some areas, post-Matthew shorelines were the most landward point of erosion in the last 40 years. No post-Irma data was included for any point along the coast. Just to conclude the unstabilized inlet zone, we looked at all of the modern shorelines and all of the historic shorelines simultaneously, and the most landward shoreline then was established as the baseline. So now I'm going to move into how the baseline was set in standard and stabilized inlet zones. In these zones, the baseline is set at the crest of the primary oceanfront sand dune. And this cartoon depiction lets you know what we're talking about when we talk about the crest or the toe of the dune. The primary dune is defined as one that has a minimum height of 3 feet and 500 feet of continuous length. So how do we know if a dune is 3 feet tall? We measured it. Points were collected at the seaward toe and crest of each dune. In collecting this field data, we used survey-grade GPS equipment. We had a Trimble R6 unit, and we were working on the South Carolina real-time network. This is just an example of what some of that field-collected data looks like. The field data were collected every 300 to 400 feet along oceanfront dunes, and every 600 to 1,000 feet along more landward dunes. In addition to this field-collected data, we also use something called LIDAR. LIDAR is a remote sensing data collection method. It's collected from an airplane, and it generates high-resolution elevation data. So we combine this elevation data in conjunction with the field data to determine the location of the primary dune. Now this is an example of what the LIDAR data looks like. For those of you that aren't familiar with looking at LIDAR data, the blue areas, obviously those are water. The green areas highlight areas of lower elevation, and the yellow and orange areas highlight areas of higher elevation. So before I move on to the setback, I want to add that for establishing baselines in standard or stabilized inlet areas that have no primary dunes, the regulation states, if there are no primary dunes, then the location can be determined based on existing natural dunes in the area. An average or ideal dune is calculated and superimposed on beaches without natural dunes. This methodology was used in areas which were armored and where no primary dunes were present. Now I'm going to move on to how the setback line was created. The setback line is established at a distance from the baseline, which is 40 times the average annual shoreline change rate, also known as the long-term erosion rate. The setback line is always a minimum of 20 feet landward of the baseline. Since the shoreline change rate, or that long-term erosion rate, is central to establishing the setback, I want to talk a little bit about how that shoreline change rate was calculated. Our analysis examined both modern and historic wet-dry shorelines, and those shorelines capture the high tide mark on the beachfront. We reviewed the accuracy and the source of each of these shorelines, which ranged in dates from 1850 to 2015. It's important to note, for the shoreline change rate, which established the setback, no post-Matthew or post-Irma data were included. So the shoreline change analysis is performed using a tool called AMBER. This tool analyzes those wet-dry shorelines and produces these average annual long-term shoreline change rates. So without getting too detailed into how this tool works, I want to share the basics of how it works. It starts off by drawing a line every 200 feet across the shorelines like you can see here. Next, it captures the intersection between those yellow lines that we just saw and the wet-dry shorelines I spoke about earlier. In this example, those green lines that are shore parallel are the wet-dry shorelines, and the yellow lines are the lines established by the tool. The intersection points here are shown in red, and the tool examines those intersection points and looks at those points to establish change over time. An annual shoreline change rate is then produced for every single one of those lines. And then we ran a spatial statistical tool, and it groups those lines together based on similar shoreline change rate values. So in this example here, you can see that the yellow lines are grouped together, and the green, and the blue, and the brown, and so forth. The rate values within each of these groups are averaged, and that produces the average annual shoreline change rate for each of these areas. Now, once we have that average annual shoreline change rate, that rate's multiplied by 40, and that generates the distance landward from the baseline. Again, the setback line is always a minimum of at least 20 feet landward of the baseline. So that concludes the discussion of the process of how we establish the baseline and setback. And now I want to talk a little bit about hearing from you. So as you may know, we are currently in a public comment period, which opened October 6th and ends on November 6th. So if you don't want to speak tonight, which of course we encourage you to do so if you want, you can submit comments to us during this period, either online at this location or just mail them to us. You can find out more information about this whole process and view your lines at scdhec.gov/beachfront lines. As Elizabeth noted earlier, you can also call to make an appointment to discuss the impacts to your property. If you are a property owner who disagrees with the proposed beachfront lines, there are a few things you can do. As I said, you can notify DHEC through the public comment process, which runs through November 6th. Final lines will be available on December 8th. It is the department's position that you have up to 1 year to request a review of the lines by DHEC's governing board. In addition, a property owner may appeal that board decision to the South Carolina Administrative Law Court. Here are a few key facts in summary. There is a legislative deadline to complete this process by December 31st in order to allow any seaward movement of the lines during this revision. The proposed setback areas do not create a no-build zone. And finally, it is DHEC's position that property owners have up to 1 year to request a review of the lines from DHEC's governing board, and in addition may appeal that board decision to the South Carolina Administrative Law Court. Thank you for your attention, and we are now going to move into the formal comment period.
Before I start calling out names, I'm going to start with elected officials that may be in the room. Mayor Bill Otis.
My name is Bill Otis. I'm wearing 3 hats tonight. I'm a member of the board of governors of the South Carolina Beach Advocates, and I'm making a presentation on their behalf. I'm mayor of the town of Pawleys Island, and I'm making a presentation on behalf of the town of Pawleys Island. And I'm also, as a lot of you, somebody who's directly affected by the changes in the lines. So I'm making a personal comment. I'm making these first comments as a member of the board of directors of South Carolina Beach Advocates, which is an organization formed to reinforce the activities and interest of the restoration and the preservation of South Carolina beaches and inlets. Its board of directors is made up primarily of mayors and administrators of South Carolina coastal communities. Its membership includes mayors, administrators, and public officials, as well as scientists, engineers, and others interested in the purposes of the organization. That purpose, again, the restoration and preservation of South Carolina beaches. On behalf of the board, I want to read the following position statement on these lines and the process by which they've been set. The position statement requests a one-year extension of the implementation of the proposed lines. This is the position statement of the South Carolina Beach Advocates. In June 2016, the governor signed what became Act Number 127, previously S-139, which, among other things, statutorily mandated that DHEC should update the beachfront jurisdictional lines, and the baseline should not be moved seaward from its position on December 31st, 2017. The relevant section of the Act amends Section 48-39-280 relating to the 40-year retreat policy so as to prohibit the baseline from moving seaward from the position to be determined on December 31st, 2017, and to eliminate the right of local governments and landowners to position the administrative law court to move the baseline seaward upon the completion of a beach renourishment project. The Blue Ribbon Committee recommendation is the concept of establishing a baseline that should not move seaward was recommended by the Blue Ribbon Committee in 2013, and I was a member of the Blue Ribbon Committee. And it stated, subject to South Carolina Code of Laws 48-39-290D, the baseline established under the South Carolina Beachfront Management Act should not move seaward from its position on June 14, 2011. The effective date of the recommendations agreed on by the Blue Ribbon Committee referred to a known baseline position. This was changed by the General Assembly of the State of South Carolina to a date in the future, subject to the unknowns of possible impacts of hurricanes and storms on the beachfront. South Carolina's coast has recently been impacted by hurricanes Joaquin in 2015, Matthew in 2016, and Hurricane Irma in 2017. Extraordinary storms that have caused substantial beach and dune erosion and also consumed a large amount of DHEC and community staff time. Measurements taken in or after 2015 may not be representative of typical beach conditions. Highly erosional conditions still exist in many communities. The proposed lines were published on October 6, 2017, followed by a one-month public comment period. Public hearings are being held between October 23rd and 25th. The public comment period closes on November 6, 2017, leaving only 1 month from November 6th, the close of the public comment period, and December 8th, the notification of state line adoption. For OCRM to review public comments and based on these comments, possibly make line revisions. Unfortunately, many beachfront property owners are unaware of this issue. Coastal experts and beach managers of the South Carolina Beach Advocates agree that the public data disclosure may be insufficient. Line reports published for each community do not provide the details of the data or the methodology utilized to determine the proposed lines. Some of the proposed line changes may put property owners at odds with local building codes and local building officials, and at odds with OCRM. Communities need sufficient time to review how line movements affect the community's building permit program and the ability to present additional data to OCRM if available to discuss these impacts. Many beachfront communities are small, underfunded, and stressed by the effort of addressing storm damage. That's us. Always out. In the light of rising sea levels and chronic erosion, beachfront communities are investing in beach preservation more than ever before. This investment includes beach renourishment, dune restoration, and the collection of a significant amount of data which may or may not have been taken into consideration during the baseline revisions. Since publication of the proposed lines, the South Carolina Beach advocates have obtained the following clarifications. DHEC issued a statement on the baseline appeal process on October 18, 2017. It states that the DHEC board intends to accept landowner appeals made within 1 year of the revision date. However, the South Carolina Beach advocates are concerned with the validity of this statement because Section 44-1-60 states that all DHEC decisions must be challenged within 15 days. If not, the decision may become final and may not be subject to review as a contested case under the Administrative Procedures Act. The Administrative Law Court may not have jurisdiction to hear these challenges. All available shoreline data were used, including some shorelines that date back to the 1800s and shorelines from November 2016, 1 month after Hurricane Matthew. Additionally, a significant change from previous line revisions was that post-renourishment shoreline data were included. The criterion was that shoreline had to be at least 2 years older than the previous beach renourishment project. The net result is a decrease in the erosion rate on beaches that have been repeatedly renourished over the past 20 to 30 years. Our board of directors is made up of mayors and administrators of South Carolina beach communities. The process of establishing a permanent, most seaward baseline position is an extremely significant state policy decision. Other than Act 127, there is no compelling reason to fix the baseline on the arbitrary December 31st, 2017 date. It is our position that a compressed schedule is the wrong approach to a permanent state policy, particularly without sufficient public data disclosure and with limited public notification. In summary, the Blue Ribbon Committee recommended adoption of the 2011 lines with regard to their seaward boundary. These lines do not honor that recommendation. Measurements taken subsequent to Matthew in 2016 and Irma in 2017 may not be representative in that they do not reflect more customary conditions as affected by ongoing natural processes and by recurring nourishment efforts. The notice and timeframes for comment are inadequate for appropriate proper owner notification to permit study of the background and methodology on which these lines are based. The South Carolina Beach advocates request consideration of a 1-year time extension to allow for sufficient data review, additional public notification, public comment, and local and OCRM staff review time. We request the implementation of revised state beachfront jurisdictional lines be delayed until December of 2018. That is the position statement of the South Carolina Beach Advocates. As mayor of the town of Pawleys Island, my second hat, I am representing over 120 property owners, nearly 50% of our beachfront properties impacted by these line changes. We have not had time to evaluate the impacts, but we believe that on one street on the island, there are over 80 houses now affected by the baseline with a market value of over $100 million, according to the county treasurer. If the house touches the baseline, it requires a special permit, which has been explained. And it's discussed in the handout. I want to point out that there have been less than 71 special permits, as indicated earlier, issued by DHEC in the over 25 years that these lines have been established. And all special permits are subject to comment and or legal action by activist environmental groups who have a tendency to appeal about everything on the beachfront. The last permit the town was indirectly involved in was appealed by several of these groups, and it took 3 years for an administrative law court to issue an opinion Finally, as I wrote our property owners, in my opinion, these new lines mean that you're giving up more of your free use and control of your property to the state of South Carolina. And this is important. Those things currently allowed, which are in the documents that you've seen, are all subject to change by the legislature, or in some cases by the regulators, in the future, as these baselines have now been changed. I'm also submitting a resolution. I've still got my town College Island hat on. I'm also submitting a resolution for the record of the Town Council of the Town of College Island, passed unanimously last Monday, also requesting a one-year extension of the implementation. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll refer back to a couple of the whereases. That resolution number 1 of the Blue Ribbon Committee, which has been referred and is referred to in this process, the number 1 recommendation was to replace language regarding the policy of retreat with the following: the policy of the state of South Carolina is the preservation of its coastal beachfront and beach dune system. That recommendation has never been adopted by the state. Secondly, recommendation number 2 was subject to the Code of Laws. The baseline established under the South Carolina Beachfront Management Act should not move seaward from its position on June 14, 2011. I've already spoken about that. So with all of this, as of October 6, 2017, 7 years and 3 hurricanes later, South Carolina DHEC issued proposed revised baselines and setback lines, which negatively impacted a substantial number of beachfront properties on College Island, some in a dramatic and pronounced way, and announced only a 30-day comment period for owners to dispute the lines and compressed data for finalization of the lines as of December 31st. Whereas the property owners' time to dispute the lines is only 30 days. And the process of communications with owners outside the town and out of state has taken the town 15 of the 30 days, leaving owners only 15 days to comment with insufficient information and only the alternative of an expensive appeal after December 31st, 2017. The resolution is that the town requests a one-year delay, and I will submit that for the record. In addition, most of the beachfront governments have a staff with expertise dedicated to representing their property owners and constituents. We've asked to be able to challenge the process as a government, and so far have been told that only property owners who have no staff or specific expertise can challenge the process. Third hat, homeowner. As a homeowner who is directly impacted by the change in the baseline and who was a member of the DHEC Blue Ribbon Committee on beachfront management 6 years ago, I probably have more background and experience in beachfront management and South Carolina laws and regulations than most property owners, surely in Pawleys Island, maybe broader than that. Today is the first time I will actually be able to be informed of what went into the changes to the lines affecting my property. And I'm so concerned that I've hired a consultant from Charleston to help me respond to what we find out today. What does that say about the chances of the many people who are here or who aren't here or who really haven't heard about the changes? Finally, the state went under an emergency declaration in preparation for Hurricane Irma on September 6th. Hurricane Irma substantially impacted our area on September 11th. DHEC released the revised beachfront jurisdictional lines on October 6th, in the middle of the emergency declaration. And the emergency order is in effect until November 6th, which is also the last day to dispute the lines on our property. After December 31st, we have to appeal, an expensive and time-consuming process. I believe that none of this was anticipated or considered by the state legislature when they set this process in motion. As an affected property owner, I also ask for a 1-year extension. I apologize if I slightly overran my time, but thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to call Councilman John Thomas.
I am John Thomas, a member of Georgetown County Council representing the people of Litchfield and Myrtle Inlet. On behalf of my constituents, I ask that the implementation of revised state beachfront jurisdictional lines be delayed. Although I did not have time to get official authorization, I believe I speak for all of Georgetown County Council as well. Some of the many reasons to delay implementation are the notice and timeframes for comment are inadequate for property owner notification and to study the background and methodology on which the new lines are based. Very few of affected property owners were even aware of the October 6th DHEC announcement of revised jurisdictional lines, and a deadline for public comment of November 6th gives utterly inadequate time for property owners to understand the process and obtain data if they want to challenge the lines. Another reason to delay implementation of the new jurisdictional lines is to provide time to review details of the data and the methodology utilized to determine the proposed lines. These data may not represent normalized or typical beach conditions due to extraordinary storms over the last several years. Hurricane Joaquin, Matthew, and Irma caused substantial beach and dune erosion, and measurements taken after these storms may have skewed the data. I ask for a 1-year extension of jurisdictional line revision to allow for sufficient data review, additional public notification, public comment, and local and OCRM staff review time. The implementation of revised state beachfront jurisdictional lines should be delayed until December 2018. Thank you.
Reed Sherrard.
I passed you my time to Mayor Otis if he wants to do it again. I pass.
Thank you. Aaron Pate.
Good evening. As he said, I'm Erin Pate. I serve as the North Coast Director for the South Carolina Coastal Conservation League. And I just want to thank DHEC for providing the opportunity to comment tonight and to provide resources this evening where property owners can really find out what the impact on their properties will be and what the sort of trajectory going forward will be in terms of commenting and appealing. We are providing comment tonight on DHEC's proposed updates to the baseline and setback lines that are updated every 7 to 10 years, as you heard just a moment ago, since the creation of the Beachfront Management Act, which was passed in 1988. This year, the process is slightly different because of the Shoreline Act passed in 2016 by the state legislature. This law updated the beachfront laws to provide strong protection for coastal residents, property owners, and taxpayers. The law is environmentally sound because it ensures the baseline can't move seaward, closer to the ocean, in DHEC's future baseline updates. The Shoreline Act was developed nearly after 10 years of hard work and deliberation by legislators, realtors, environmental advocates, elected officials at the local level. In fact, former State Senator Ray Cleary of Myrtle Inlet served on the Blue Ribbon Commission, as did Mayor Bill Otis. They made recommendations in 2010, which formed the basis for the Shoreline Act, which became law 6 years later. The commission included a diverse set of stakeholders, which included folks like scientists, developers, attorneys, local elected officials, and many others who worked for years to identify research and policy needs to protect our coast. There's been years of work, research, public input that has gone into these proposed lines. Setting a baseline that will never move seaward is critical at this point in history, and it's important to get it right. We understand DHEC's methodology of collecting field data, using the best available technology and historical data trends to be the most accurate that it's ever been previously. We also believe these public comments tonight are crucial from people on the ground in their communities, people who have felt and seen the dynamics of the coastline over time. We have heard from coastal geologists and scientists who are working to better understand the proposed lines in order to translate this information to stakeholders that would benefit both DHEC and the public. We encourage the agency to share more of this data and information with these third-party experts. We understand that coastal residents have concerns, and we encourage you all along the coast to participate in this public process and to provide helpful input to DHEC. If the last few years are any indication of what's to come in the future, we really can't wait any longer. These lines protect all of us, our valuable dune system that keeps us safe, investments along the coast, public beach access, and marine life. Many of us who live along the coast have experienced increasingly severe storm surges and rising seas. We must respond with history in hand, using sound science, technology, and forward-thinking policy that prepares and protects us for the future.
Brad Dean.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Brad Dean, here tonight on behalf of the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce, the nearly 3,000 businesses and 56,000 employees we represent. If I could summarize my remarks in just 3 words, I would echo the comments often uttered by Trooper Bob of the South Carolina Highway Patrol. Please slow down. We recognize that this process, to the staff that have been involved, is probably a very scientific process, governed by data and analysis and legislative rules. But it appears that there is a bit of a disconnect between legislative intent and what we're seeing rolled out. And we certainly don't fault the agencies for that. I was astonished to read of one legislator who was actually involved in this process early on, who was surprised this came out and only learned of that because they were a legislator, and that individual happens to represent hundreds of property owners. And so it begs the question, were other organizations that needed to be involved in this early on, or at least have enough notice for this to get the word out, like the South Carolina Realtors, the Coastal Carolina Association of Realtors, and others? Have we taken enough time to get the words out? There's so many property owners that are just now hearing about this. And what about those property owners that don't live in South Carolina? Have they been given adequate notice? This is just far too important of a process to rush. And so we need to make sure that we're taking the appropriate time. And we understand for those who've studied and involved through this, that it probably seems like the process has unfolded in a very measured fashion. But I have to tell you, from those who are being impacted in this community, it appears from the outside looking in, like this is a freight train moving downhill, and there's too many people in this community that are at the bottom of that hill, and they're fearing devastating consequences. We also would point out to you, and I hope it's not lost upon the state agencies, the significant impact that this could have on the state of South Carolina. Tourism is the #1 industry in the state of South Carolina, and the Grand Strand is more than 1/3 of the state's tourism industry. Add to that the second largest economy along the Grand Strand, real estate and development. Those two industries directly impact more than 100,000 wage earners here along the coast. Tourism and real estate development don't just help pay for profits and revenues for businesses, they also help pay revenues to schools and law enforcement and infrastructure, not just here, but throughout the state. So we need to take into consideration whatever economic impacts this might ultimately have. There is an extended impact not only in this community, but statewide. And while that may not drive the end decision, it certainly needs to be factored in as a significant consequence of this. And finally, and I certainly don't want to dismiss the fact, I think that the information you've laid out is certainly very straightforward. I'm encouraged that only 71 of 72 of those objections, I think, were ultimately acknowledged and processed. But there's a cost to that 71. And that doesn't account for the cost of uncertainty. And you need only ask a realtor in this community what the cost of uncertainty is. That's a cost that doesn't just impact the individual property owner, but surrounding property owners. And knowing the significance of that, that certainly ought to be a concern as we move forward in this process. The fact is this: you are under a legislative mandate, but there is absolutely no penalty to the state agencies for missing that December 31st deadline. No penalty, but there is a tremendous economic penalty in this room and throughout this community if this decision is made wrong. But we certainly need to acknowledge the economic impact and the devastating impact this could have on our community and our economy. And we're certainly not suggesting that you could just ignore that, but we would encourage you to express the need for all of the data to be analyzed and shared. Plenty of input, not just for those here tonight, but for other third parties that might be involved in this, representing owners, for out-of-state owners, to make sure that everyone who has a vested interest in this decision is ultimately informed so that the right decision can be made and implemented. We recognize that you're bound by legislative guidance, but we hear that maybe perhaps there's been a bit of a disconnect, and I'm not going to go into all the specifics of that. I think Mayor Otis actually outlined much of that already. We would just simply echo those comments and urge you, slow this process down and recognize that while there is a deadline, there's no penalty for missing that deadline. We would encourage the agencies to express the need to the General Assembly for a little more time to let this process unfold, to make sure all stakeholders who are impacted understand it fully and have a chance to weigh in, and that we make sure the ultimate decision that's implemented is the right decision for South Carolina. Thank you for your time.
Sarah Zimmerman.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Zimmerman. I'm a property owner in Pawleys Island. I am also on town council for Pawleys Island, and I'm really here more as an individual property owner. And I live on the south end of Pawleys Island, an area that is tremendously impacted. The 60-plus houses south of me will be essentially vacant land if these proposals are followed through with. On here it states that the proposed setbacks won't make it a no-build zone. If it doesn't make it a no-build zone, then what is it doing? If I have to get a special permit to rebuild my house, is DHEC not taking my property? They are the ones that have established these lines. Will they buy my property from me? I have been encouraged to get a current appraisal of my property so that in the future, if these guidelines affect my value, would I not be able to ask DHEC for reimbursement? The other question I have is, why has DHEC chosen to ignore the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Beach Committee? Was that not the purpose for that committee to make recommendations? Thank you.
Walter McElveen.
I am Walter McElveen. I am a 24-year resident of the beachfront community, a 24-year property owner, a 20-year resident of the beachfront community, and I'm also a realtor with 20 years experience of selling oceanfront lots and homes and helping buyers buy oceanfront lots and homes. I want to thank you for the presentation. It answered a lot of my questions. I want to thank you for giving me the time to speak at this highly compressed time schedule that you're on. As realtors, or as a realtor, I'm the first one who meets someone in South Carolina who wants to buy a house in my area that's on the beachfront. And I'm required by law to reveal to them that if they buy on the beachfront, that their house or their property, it comes under the Beachfront Management Act. And there's certain restrictions that are going to happen to that property. I know more about that restrictions and the Beachfront Management Act, we realtors do, than most of us, because we deal with that. Of course, when something goes on with the Beachfront Management Act, we get calls from everyone who has bought a house or something with us that ask the questions. And believe me, they'll set off a lot of calls at my office. I have reviewed the proposed lines from my little community, Pawleys Island, and the Litchfield beaches, and I'm alarmed. It is the largest movement of the beachfront lines that I have known about in 20 years. These new lines have caused a panic. I have calls from people who are asking if the state is taking their property. I say, no, the state is not. I have calls, most of my calls are simple. How does this affect my property value? My answer is probably not good. Putting restrictions on people's property does not normally increase their property value. And I can't sit there and honestly say, don't worry about it. We've heard the term may be allowed many times tonight. You may be allowed to build back. You may be allowed. Why? Because you're under a permit situation. A lot of us here on the coast understand permits. We used to draw a sketch of a dock, and with $45, we could get a dock permitted. Nowadays, hundreds of dollars later, with surveys that are certified, we might get a dock permitted. No change in the laws, just change in the permit process. We're weary of permits now. But my main point tonight is too much too fast, just like the rest of us have said. I'm speaking as a private citizen. I'm worried about the property value impact that these big line changes have made. I'm worried about the property rights impact that these lines have made. I'm worried about the beach renourishment funding impact that these lines are going to make, about insurance cost possibilities, about the rates of insurance and its availability. And finally, this jump in the line, in which Ms. Zimmer's had pointed out, it's gone 100 feet at Pawleys Island. From houses that were not affected at all to houses that are very affected. They're all seaward of the line. We even have second row owners that are now affected by the Beachfront Management Act, and they don't live on the beachfront because the lines have gone so big. And one of the reasons the lines have changed so big is the science that we're using. The primary dune line, 3 feet, 500 feet long. That's great. Do all beaches have primary dunes? Evidently not. Do we have the right science? Do we go to the right method when we end up at Pawleys Island and Litchfield without a primary dune? Well, you can ask a bunch of people who just found out their houses are now seaward of the line, and they'll think we don't have the right science. I don't think we have the right science. I think the agency needs to take more time to come up with a better method for figuring out what to do when there's no primary dune. And I think all of us need to have a little more time to look at the impact on property values and property rights that these lines are now taking place. So I ask also for 1 year extension and implementing these lines. Thank you.
Jimmy Gregg.
Good evening. My name is Jimmy Gray. Thank you everyone for organizing this today. I serve as the Government Affairs Director for the Coastal Carolinas Association of Realtors. The Coastal Carolinas Association of Realtors represents nearly 4,000 realtors in Horry and Georgetown counties. As a part of our mission, we advocate for legislative and economic initiatives and promote the rights that protect private property. The protection of private property rights are at the core of our advocacy efforts. Private property owners will have the option to appeal these lines on or near their properties, but such an appeal is going to cost nearly $1,000 at minimum, and we've heard how few appeals have actually been successful. Private property owners and realtors alike simply have not had enough time to fully prepare for the sweeping impact of these newly drawn lines. While CCAR appreciates the opportunity to comment publicly on this matter, our association believes that the November 6th deadline for public comment and the January 1st implementation date are simply too ambitious. Our members need more time to study how these new lines will impact our local economy and home ownership. We would appreciate any action that DHEC is able to take to delay or postpone the public comment or implementation for 12 months. Further, CCAR will support any legislative or executive efforts to postpone such implementation. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Sarah Johnson.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Johnson. I am one of those 80 owners that Mayor Otis was talking about. My home is on Springs Avenue, which is on the south end of Pawleys Island. I've owned the home only for 10 years. No, wait, not quite 10 years. Other people have talked about living there and being there for many years. But in those since 2010, years that I've owned the property, I have seen the dunes change 3 different times. After Matthew, the dune was completely gone. And then after Irma, the dune was gone again. And I think it was Joaquin where the dune was affected prior to that. So in less than 10 years, the dune has changed quite a bit. I guess I don't understand enough of the science about how the change or how DHEC is coming up with the new setback lines. But where they've put the new setback lines, my house is completely seaward of the setback line and the baseline. After Matthew, I had to go through OCRM to get approval of rebuilding my dock. And the new baseline is now cutting through my dock. So I have certainly felt the impact of trying to work with DHEC and OCRM to get a permit. The process was time-consuming and costly, and I know they say they've approved 71 out of 72 special permits, but when I find out that my whole house is now going to be in a special permit area, it's very disturbing. I pay over $15,000 a year in taxes and maybe $20,000 in insurance. I believe that my insurance will be affected because of this change, and I think that by the decrease in my value, that my taxes that I pay to Georgetown would be affected also. So I certainly, in the 15 days or so that I've known about this, have not been able to get any projected costs of how this would damage me. I just feel that it definitely will lower the value of my home, increase my insurance, and probably decrease the taxes that are paid to Georgetown County. I am opposed to this drastic change, but if I can't get it to stop, I certainly would like to agree with Mayor Otis and change the deadline for at least 1 year. Thank you.
I too am a property owner on the south end of Pawleys Island. Ms. Johnson just really kind of lined up what all property owners, whether you're on Pawleys Island or not, need to really be focused on. I think all of this is going to turn into a situation of unintended consequences. And we don't know what those consequences are right now. It's happened way too fast for any of us, whether it's appraisals, appeals. It just is, it really is just going for uneducated about these issues. It's going just way, way too fast. There are going to be significant changes in property values up and down the coast. My line is moving 90 plus feet. I'm going to be seaward of the baseline. Walter is absolutely right, that when you find yourself seaward of the baseline and now find that you're going to be in a special permit area, it's going to affect the attractiveness of your home for a potential buyer. And that's going to affect property values. The term that was used about special permitting was under certain criteria. You can't find what the certain criteria is in DHEC's information, OCRM's information. We need to know as property owners what is certain criteria. I built my house after Hurricane Hugo in 1993. I'm oceanfront. I wanted to put a 12 by 12 lookout, what we call a lookout. It's a deck seaward of the setback line. Was told it was a no-build zone. And consequently, I put my deck on the other side, landward of the setback line. Those kinds of things for any property owner that is going to be in a special permitted zone, which most of Pawleys Island, certainly the south end of Pawleys Island, and I'm sure in some of your beach communities, are going to be seaward, and have to go through the special permitting is going to be, in my opinion, a very long, arduous, and expensive process. And so I really encourage property owners, talk to other property owners about this, and make sure they're aware of what's going on with their property. I encourage DHEC to slow this process down. Well, you're talking about our lives here. You're talking about cherished assets that are being put in jeopardy over this, and it's a completely arbitrary process. The deadline is arbitrary. It can be changed. There's no reason for it to be, no good scientific reason for it to be what it is right now. It's strictly an arbitrary, legislatively decided deadline. That's it. And it is going to impact your lives forever. I question whether or not beach renourishments that are taking place right now, why haven't they been considered with the new setback lines? Because they've already done the measurements. Those were done in 2015. We're going to pay for, as a community on Pawleys Island, we're going to pay for 725,000 cubic yards of sand to be pumped back on our beach. It's going to last 10 years if we don't have some kind of a terrifically catastrophic weather event. That's going to make, in front of my house, which has very little dry beach at high tide right now, that's going to give me 90 feet of dry, or 60 feet of dry beach in front of my house, not being considered. That's a significant impact when you're deciding on setback lines and baselines. Those kinds of things, when communities are investing their hard-earned money, should be under consideration rather than 40-year trends and not recognizing at all the efforts that we're making to protect our beaches. It's curious to me that the state would be looking to do, and this is how it appears to me, that the state is looking to drive us off the beach. That where is the advocacy? some of the most valuable tax-producing real estate in the state of South Carolina is located along the shores. Unintended consequences. If they destroy our property values, if they deny a special permit to rebuild after a catastrophic weather event, what is the state going to do to replace that revenue? What are the counties going to do to replace that revenue? Unintended consequences. I agree with Sarah Zimmerman. In those situations where we aren't allowed to rebuild, and there are going to be those situations, because the state has unilaterally moved the lines, it amounts to taking. And I would really like to see the state's position on that, on your site. That what happens when a special permit is not granted? How is that going to be addressed for the individual property owner? You've put us in this situation by moving the lines. Generations of people who have lived on the same piece of property will be forced off. Doesn't seem fair. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Leslie Linhart. I'm with the Linhart Law Firm. And I want to make a couple of points tonight. First of all, I'd like to echo what Mr. McElveen said, that really the time period that we're working on is so compressed. And it's not allowing property owners to be able to analyze this data that DHEC has put out. If you are in a negatively affected area, one of the things that you want to do is to hire an environmental consultant, as Mayor Otis has done. Bill Iser is here tonight. He's one of those consultants. But there are very few of those that are available, and you are not giving them the time to put in the time to look at this data in advance of this deadline. So I echo those comments. I would also like to point out something that's very important that everyone needs to remember. DHEC has put on their, walk out here, on their summary sheet, it's DHEC's position that property owners have up to 1 year to request a review of the lines by DHEC's governing board. And us in the legal community disagree with that. We believe it's incorrect. And I'll tell you why. The regulations do have a 1 year time period that has been there since the inception of the beachfront management program. However, in 2006, the legislature passed a provision, section 44-1-60, which provides for a uniform procedure for all DHEC staff decisions to be appealed to the DHEC board. And that gives you 15 days, not 1 year. The Beachfront Management Act provision, which is 4839-280, was also amended to allow for appeals to be filed in accordance with 44-1-60. And it's pretty basic law that a statute always trumps a regulation. So I want y'all to be aware of that, because when we're talking about this compression of time, you're really compressed when they come out with these decisions at the end of December and you have 15 days to appeal. So that's really the crux of my comment. I appreciate the time to speak, and I appreciate DHEC letting us come here today. Thank you.
Mary Shade.
My name is Mary Shade. I traveled here with my law partner, Lika Caldwell, my colleague, Leslie Lynn Hart, who just spoke. We're environmental attorneys. We have multiple clients that are very interested in these proceedings, and we're here to offer whatever support and comment we can to OCRM regarding our concerns. I'm a big fan of the movie My Cousin Vinny. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie, but if I'm channel surfing, I always stop and watch it. And listening to OCRM staff describe the spatial computer electronic tools that they used made me think of the scene where they're convinced that the two young boys driving the '64 Skylark committed the crime because of the tire tracks. And they put an expert witness on the stand who's an expert in automotive technology. And he says that he performed an analysis using a dual column gas chromatograph Hewlett-Packard model 5710 with flame analyzing something on it. And that's the tool he used. And based on that analysis, he concluded that definitely the tire tracks came from the Buick Skylark. Then the best performance ever is when Marisa Tomei, the girlfriend of Vinny, gets on the stand, and she also is not an educated expert, but she worked for years in her daddy's mechanic shop. And she looked at some photographs, and she came to the conclusion, based on her visual inspection, not a fancy piece of equipment, that actually a Pontiac Tempest could have also made those tire marks. So my point is, computer models are great. They can solve some problems for us. Technology's great. But we're talking about people's homes, and we're talking about beachfront areas where people have decades of historical knowledge about their properties. These houses, in many instances, have stood for decades. I don't know how long, many years on Pawleys Island, many years at Garden City and Surfside. OCRM's been setting lines for 30 years, and suddenly, after 30 years of setting lines, we've got homes in Garden City, homes in Surfside, and homes on Pawleys with a 85 to 100-foot movement. As was described, you've now got beachfront lines that are on roads that are advancing toward the Intercoastal Waterway. And it's potentially, possibly, because they did something new. They used some new equipment. They did some kind of new modeling or analysis. And my comment is simply that we need to listen to property owners. We need to look at their photographs. We need to hear their observations. We need to know how long their house has stood, how long their roads and driveways have been intact, how quickly their dune repairs after certain events, how quickly the beach rebuilds. That's the real data for determining hazards and risks. So as Leslie pointed out, the appeal time frame is very short. The time frame now to go get yourself an expert and provide information to DHEC to help them evaluate the decisions that they made is drawing quickly to an end in early November. But don't underestimate your own knowledge, your own experience with your property. It makes no sense now for these lines to advance as landward as they have based on your history with your property. Thank you.
Fred Collins.
My name is Fred Collins, and I represent Pawleys Pier Village Building Committee. And we're on the island with 9 buildings and 54 homes. Now, these 9 buildings and 54 homes are in a common controlled area that's controlled by the HOA. Due to the new line setbacks, well, we have 3 affected buildings, and that's 18 homes that are going to be affected that we have to deal with. Again, all these buildings are in a common area. What I'm also asking DHEC is we should allow not only the owners, but also the HOA boards. And all these affected type resorts like ours, we're just a little bit unique on the island, have access and should be allowed to public comment and also participate in the appeals. So that's what I'm asking DHEC currently as of tonight. And also, like everyone else says, we have many, many long-distance owners pretty much around the entire country. And I'm having a hard time getting this information out, virtually working overnight and trying to contact more than 200 owners, because a lot of these things are sub-owned by family members and the whole lot. It's hard to coordinate this and get everyone together and get everybody up to date and even try to explain. I have been days just explaining to a handful of people. I still got hundreds more to go. And we're also wanting to get together to arrange a meeting with DHEC so these owners that are involved can ask questions and also get a better feeling. So I ask, please, 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 let's slow this process down. Let's get this information out. I've got a lot of folks that don't even comprehend what a setback and baselines are. I've written simplified documents and have written diagrams to try to explain in a simplistic form what it means and how it may affect them. So once again, I'm just asking, please slow down. Thanks.
Lydia Thompson.
Good evening. I'm also a lawyer who loves my cousin Vinny. So I just wanted to make a few points of clarification. As you've heard, the baseline and setback line have been redrawn every 7 to 10 years since 1988. And this is the 4th time that they've been revised. The amendment that prevents the baseline and setback line from moving further seaward after 2017 was hard fought over several legislative sessions. As you heard from Mayor Otis, it was originally proposed to be 2011. It was highly publicized throughout the coast, and OCRM hosted a session to discuss and explain the upcoming revisions as early as May 31st of this year. The law allows any landowner a full year to seek review of the baseline, setback line, erosion rate, or all three if they believe any of the department's determinations are in error. The property owner must submit substantiating evidence in support of their claim that the department's determination is in error. If the department disagrees with the landowner, they can appeal to the administrative law court. And so you already will have a year, and I just wanted to make that clear. DHEC's interpretation of their own regulations is going to be given deference. The department routinely grants permits for structures seaward of the setback line and baseline, and the fact that every single permit has been issued except one shows that the lines do not prevent reconstructions of homes or new homes. Furthermore, the special permit provisions actually incorporate the taking standard. So DHEC is not allowed to take your property, and they must issue a special permit. If not issuing it would result in a taking of your property. There's actually no evidence that property values have gone down, and in fact, property values along the coast have been going up, even for properties seaward of the baseline and setback line since 1988. The new lines will also have no impact on private insurance or FEMA. Information provided by FEMA and the SC Department of Insurance indicates that insurance rates are influenced by a structure's proximity to water, not state jurisdictional lines, and that expanded minimum setback area may provide community discounts under the CRS program. Even though the line setting process has been in place for decades, has not slowed development or decreased property values, it's still important that these accurately reflect natural processes. These lines are about making sure that people know about erosional risks. The jurisdictional lines are established by DHEC as part of our state's policy of retreat from the beach. This policy implements recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Committee on Shoreline Management, a bipartisan committee that you heard about from Mayor Otis. The lines are about making sure that people know about the erosional risks in their properties and are able to adapt accordingly. This is especially important as we face the impacts of climate change, including increased storm events and sea level rise. As you're all well aware, we've had 3 major storm events impact our coastline in the past 3 years. Even though it may not be possible to go back and redraw the lines post-Irma, unless, of course, DHEC ignores their statute and grants the additional year that people have been asking for, DHEC should at least ensure that all line calculations are done with the data that includes post-Matthew conditions. Furthermore, it would be inconsistent with law to rely upon renourished beaches to calculate the erosion rate. The baseline for a renourished standard zone is drawn where the crest of the primary oceanfront sand dunes for that zone would be located if the shoreline had not been altered, according to 4839-280. Thus, it makes sense that the erosion rate calculated for determining the setback line must be the natural erosion rate and not artificially deflated by artificial beach renourishment. This reflects legislative intent to discourage reliance on artificial beaches. Thank you for your time.
Frank Robinson.
I'm Frank Robinson. I'm a property owner on the south end of Pawleys. My family's owned the house down there since the early 50s. The statute that provides for the setting of these lines, it says that you will use available scientific and historic data. I heard a lot tonight about scientific data, which I understood nothing of. But I have been on this beach since the early 50s. I was there before Hazel hit. Hazel hit and destroyed the south end, and in time the dunes came right back. They were there, they were in good shape until Hugo came. Hugo came and destroyed them. That's been almost 30 years ago. And until Matthew hit, the dunes were back and they were doing fine. So I think that they do need to consider this historic data. And when I first signed up, I thought I was signing up for to be able to ask questions. But I see that now you have to go back to another room to do that. But I don't understand under any circumstance how a line could be set parallel to Springs Avenue. I don't see how the science would back that up. Thank you.
John Sadler.
I'm John Sadler from Columbia, and I'm a 50% property owner of a beach house on Springs Avenue in the Bird's Nest area, approximately in front of the old broken groin. My family has owned the house since 1974, and I have to say that based on my recollections, the level of the sand on the beach in front of our house is about exactly the same as what it was in the early 1970s. And how do I know this? I think everybody can figure this out without scientists by looking at the level of the sand up against the groins. If the sand was eroded so much, we would need ladders to get over all of the groins as we walk from one to another. What I'd like to talk about is the regulation R3015 that talks about the criteria for a special permit. It says that generally special permits will be granted by the department only under extraordinary circumstances. A special permit may only be granted where it meets the following conditions. A lot of these sound like they're out of environmentalism 101. There shall be no adverse impact on the stated policies of the Beachfront Management Act, including the policies protecting the sand dunes and preservation of dry beach. Granting a special permit will not create a situation contrary to the public health, safety, or welfare, whatever that means. The department shall consider whether or not the structure would be constructed on renourished beach, the erosion rate of the site, and the cumulative effect that similar structures will have on the beach dune system. So if I were to ask for a special permit, I would have absolutely no reason to believe, other than the 70 out of 71, but that's not good enough for me, because I read what the code and the regulations say, and it leaves an awful lot of wiggle room. And now to hear about how environmental groups can attack and comment whenever you file for the process, that's very discouraging. Also, I'd like to say that I don't trust the arbitrary settings of the baseline by the DHEC scientists. Now, I'm all for science, but I know that science is often based on certain suppositions that may or may not be accurate. So we don't have a primary ocean dune as a result of 3 successive hurricanes in 3 years. And because we don't have a primary dune, I don't think, I'd like to get this question answered, but I don't think that DHEC considers the artificial dune line pushed up by bulldozers to be a primary dune line. Therefore, DHEC creates a fiction in that an imaginary dune line using the best scientific and historical data must be used. And right now, they've decided arbitrarily that this dune line is right on the road on Springs Avenue behind our house. Now, whatever this best scientific and historical data is, must have taken a quantum leap all of a sudden, because when the baseline was set back in 2010, it was also required to be set based upon the best scientific and historical data. And so much for that holding up. Now, it seems to me that the pending evaluation was weighted heavily on what's happened over the past 3 years with the 3 successive hurricanes, which is very improbable and not likely to occur in the future. So what relief would I seek? Well, other than the 1-year delay, I would like to see the baseline move back to a reasonable position that is not arbitrary, or I would like to see the code changed to allow for a more certain special permit process. Thank you.
Jay Herring.
I was prepared to provide comments tonight, but I think I've got more questions than comments at this point, and I'd like to, on the record, to request a 1-year extension for time to get my questions addressed.
Thank you. Catherine Benson.
As a property owner since 2003 on the south end of Litchfield, 1315 Norris Drive, we request a 1-year extension to review the data. As a professional engineer, and one that holds degrees in both marine science and civil and environmental engineering, we love data. That has not been provided to us at all in this process. There has been inadequate property notification. There are significant economic development impacts. The taxes and fees that we've spent are in the hundreds of thousands. Under emergency order currently, dealing with repairs, it is a very difficult time to rally the property owners together. In fact, it is considered a private area down at the end of Litchfield, which gets no state benefits for renourishment. The landowners have to do that themselves. So applying that logic, shouldn't they be exempt from some rules like this? Technology is consistently changing, and the vegetation and the science behind this, as one that's been in this field for over 20 years, is continually growing. Our property is 100% impacted. Not even the driveway is within the proposed baseline. What that will result in is vacant lands and a constitutional taking. I understand there is a special permit process, but everything requires time and money. There's been no time for data review by independent consultants, and modeling analyses are often flawed with incorrect assumptions built into models. How can everybody that's been in this room and has seen this area for hundreds of years believe that all of a sudden these lines are changing by over 100 feet? This is expensive and has great impacts to hurry through this process. I'm requesting that the decision resulting from this impacts many lives, so please take adequate time to consider. Thank you.
That was everyone that was signed up to speak tonight. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to speak?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to go with this gentleman first. All right. We'll get to you next, okay? And would you state your name clearly for the record, please?
Yes. My name is Jim Allison. I work at Dunes Realty, Garden City Beach. One point I want to say right away was refuting property values. Property values did change adversely. Everything has gone up since 1950, since 1960, since 1970. That's true. Some have grown exponentially more based on the highest and best use of that property. The highest and best use was affected by the lines that went into effect in, I believe, 2001. The baseline limited construction, specifically, as you heard earlier, about swimming pools. Whether the pool application was granted or not completely affected the value of the home. The existing home the way it is today, the home the way it was prior to 2001. So although the values have gone up in the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, many have been limited because of that, that line that was drawn. That was called the 40-year setback. Many undeveloped properties are going to be radically affected by these baselines. Radically affected because they can do nothing unless they have that house permitted before the end of the year. The other, I did some bullet points. Forever is too long. These lines are supposed to be forever. I was involved in a forever deal before, and it still is in litigation. Forever is too long. When we draw a line in the sand and it can be no more, that's too long. Marriage should be forever. Radical benchmark. This benchmark is radical. This is strong. In some cases, it's not going to affect anybody. In some cases, it goes seaward. That's wonderful. And I understand the science involved in this, but I do think that a comment was made earlier about unintended consequences. I think that's what we're looking at is the unintended consequences going on. The economic impact, and I understand so much of this is driven by money, that the damage that the state has to bear when we have a catastrophic storm is substantial. But the income that the state is going to lose by losing these properties, I understand you can get a special permit if everything lines up, but we don't know what it takes to get a special permit. I guess the last thing is I recommend to DHEC, who's not a legislative body, but more of a scientific body, an environmental body in our state, I recommend that DHEC, when asked by our legislature, should we extend this a year, that DHEC says we need to extend this one more year. We didn't look at the economic consequences that the residents from Little River to Hilton Head can be affected. Not everybody, but many people are going to be affected. So that's my recommendation of DHEC, is to say, South Carolina legislature, we do need more time. Thank you.
My name's Cal Harrelson. I've represented oceanfront property owners in Surfside, Garden City, Pawleys, and Litchfield for about 24 years now. I work with Garden City Realty. Y'all have heard everything tonight. You've heard all the pros and cons. This is a DHEC-sponsored meeting, correct? It is. DHEC is going to do what DHEC wants to do by December 31st of this year, right? Probably so. It's nice to have these meetings, make some people feel good. But what we need to do is call our governor and have him issue an executive order if he wants our vote for his election. Along the coast of South Carolina, it's a lot of votes. Votes hold a lot of power. He wants to be governor again. I just recommend that we call him and ask him to extend this deadline for a year. Thank you very much.
My name is Daniel Thompson, and I'm a beachfront owner in South Litchfield. I've listened to all the things about extending for a year. In my experience, I've had a lot of things that were grandfathered in. So my proposal to, not necessarily DHEC, but to the state of South Carolina, is that they pass a law that in the future the person that buys the property knows what it is, but to go retroactive and say that, your setback line and your baseline is now going to change has upset and filled the room. And I think if you bought a piece of property and it was under the understanding that your baseline, your setback line was a certain position, I don't see any problem in you keeping that. But if there was more erosion, you're going to have it yourself, and it'll be your responsibility and not imposed upon you. Thank you.
My name is Gary Nichols. And I've been on this beach for over 40 years. I have a real estate company that rents beach houses in Surfside Beach, Garden City Beach, and the Litchfield beaches. And I can assure you that the lines that have been moved over the last several years have affected adversely the prices of those houses. The one thing, I've heard so many good comments tonight. One comment that I want to point out is that in the last 2 days, I've taken time to call 24 homeowners that are on the oceanfront. 3 of those homeowners knew about these new lines, and none of those homeowners have been notified by DHEC or South Carolina. So for those folks that are being affected by these lines, I think they need to be notified by our state. These properties, these values, so I go on record to extend the process period for 1 year. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak that hasn't spoken? All right. On behalf of DHEC, I'd like to thank everyone for your comments. The comment portion of this public hearing is now concluded. Before we adjourn this hearing, I'd like to note that written comments may be submitted through close of business on November 6, 2017. The address where written comments may be submitted is included on the flyer at the sign-up table. If you have questions about submitting written comments, please see a DHEC staff member before you leave. DHEC staff are now available in room 601 if you have questions or would like to review the lines for your specific area or property. Again, if you would prefer to make an appointment for a later date, please contact us through the information available on the flyer. The time is now 7:57 p.m. and this hearing is officially adjourned. Thank you.